Okay, so I want to talk today about rule breaking. So what comes to mind when you see this picture? Other than rule breaking, because I just primed you for that. Anything? Hero? Okay. Renegade, right? Someone who's breaking rules. What about this? Hero. Yeah. Okay. How about this one? Or this one? And yes, I did go there with a Hitler reference. Okay. So now, when you look at the first two images, you think, hero, renegade, but rule breakers. And on the right, what you have is things that are supposed to be representing order and the law and, right versus wrong. But when you look at the two of those side by side, are they equal? Well, no, they're not. So when you look at breaking rules and whether it's right or wrong, it's not just about whether or not you're following the law or following the rule. It's about the context that it's given in. It's about what the motive is that drives that behavior. So breaking the rules is not always a bad thing, and following the rules as they exist in the moment in time is not always the right thing to do. So what you need to do is make judgments all the time about a course of action to take based on what you want to do, if it's the right thing or the wrong thing. So some rules can be broken, some rules should be broken, and some rules need to be broken. And the way you determine that is through context. So good and evil, and right and wrong, and legal versus illegal is all context driven. So I want to look at one specific type of rule breaking, which is creativity. And first what I'm going to do is talk about what creativity is and what it isn't, because there's a lot of misinformation out there about what creativity entails. And so what I'm talking about is creative cognition. So I'm sure everyone has seen this image at some point. I know some of you out there have shared this on Facebook, and my head exploded. So in this image, it's an ad by Mercedes. On the left side, you have the logical and the linear thinking and, the math people. And on the right-hand side, you have the art and creativity and flourishing, all this, warm, fuzzy stuff on the right. And that's supposed to be what creativity is on the right side. Well, that's wrong. It's actually not what creativity is. So creative cognition is thinking with your whole brain. It's right plus left. So what you're doing, you're switching back and forth between conventional and unconventional thinking, making remote associations between unrelated concepts, and you're zooming in and zooming out of information, going from convergent to divergent. So you're constantly weeding out the noise from the signal and checking for relevance and usefulness of the idea. So I was at a conference and someone had described creativity as chaos but carefully edited. And the editing is really super important when you're talking about usefulness. So something that's just wild and crazy and never been seen before isn't necessarily considered creative because it doesn't have any sort of real usefulness. So it's like the difference between schizophrenia, where you're seeing patterns everywhere, and someone maybe like Richard Feynman, who saw a lot of patterns everywhere, but he was able to discern useful from not useful, the signal from the noise. So you could say creativity is an original novel solution that is both useful and appropriate given the context, environment, and task at hand. And that's pretty much the definition that's widely accepted in the field today. But by definition, creativity involves breaking rules. And we're not supposed to break the rules, right? That causes problems because we want to live, we don't want to be arrested, have to live over in foreign countries under an assumed name. So what ends up happening is people want creativity, but they don't actually reward it in practice. So one example of this is in the classroom. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a study that was done back in '95. And they asked teachers to identify personality characteristics that were associated with creativity. Because they wanted to know, how are teachers defining creativity? And they used words like determined, independent, individual, things like that. And then they had to describe low creativity. So responsible, sincere, reliable, dependable, clear thinking, tolerant, understanding, peaceable, good-natured, steady, practical, and logical, right? All the things that teachers love. Well, then they asked these teachers to rate the students on which ones they liked more. Which are the better students? Which are your most favorite versus least favorite? And guess what? The least favorite students were also rated as the most creative. So what is that telling you? So they asked the teachers, do you value creativity? Do you want it? Is it important? Oh yeah, absolutely. 90% of the teachers were almost all of them. It's very important. That's the most important skill we can teach. Yet, consistently, this isn't the only study, it's been repeated many, many, many times, the teachers do not like the students that are outspoken. They like people that follow the rules, don't question the outline, just sit in your chair, fold your hands, don't open your mouth, and everything will be fine. So they say they want it, but it's not rewarded and it's often rejected. And a couple years ago, someone decided to look at, well, why is this happening? There's got to be some reason why people say they want something, but then they don't reward it. It's not that people are all assholes. You know, they're not doing it to be mean, I don't think. It's actually a natural tendency. It's neurological. We have this bias against creativity in our brains. And so it's fueled by uncertainty. So there's dissonance. You know, we like things to be predictable. We like things to be, you know, consistent. And when something is, you know, making us go off the path that we're already on, it shakes you up a little bit and makes you uncertain, and you don't like that. So you like to have, you know, a solid answer so you can count on it. That ambiguity is sometimes, you know, unsettling. So effective creative problem solving includes both generating many novel options and then subsequently reducing uncertainty by identifying the single best option. So you have this going back and forth between, we want all of these different answers, we want all these different options, let's brainstorm, let's get as many ideas as we can. But then you have that dissonance, so you need to weed it, okay, we can't do them all, so we need to pick whichever's the best one. But that process of picking the best one, you're actually, that's the creativity bias. You know, you want to get the most safe, the most reliable, something that's been done before. You know, businesses have fear of failure, although I think in the Bay Area we're an exception to the rule. We're probably better than most areas in the world. But that is something that happens automatically, and we don't even realize we're doing it. So when you identify the optimal solution, that actually primes that reduction motive or the intolerance for uncertainty, and thereby evoking the creativity bias. So in order to avoid that feeling of ickiness, that feeling of, you know, it doesn't quite fit, they kill the creative idea. You know, I've actually worked in situations where they purposely hired me because they're like, you think so differently, you know, we need fresh ideas and we've been doing the same thing, and, you know, so I'm always like, okay, scrap the outline, let's start from scratch, and this is what we're gonna do. And, you know, based on all the evidence, this should work. You know, it hasn't been done before, but it should work. And everyone's on board and they're on board, but then when it comes down to putting it in front of the client, it's like that panic. And what happens? They scrap the idea and they go back and they pull one out of the file that they've done before, and you end up going with, you know, the 12th best solution to that. Because there is that uncertainty, and it's fear, really. So by requiring these gatekeepers to identify the best and most accurate answer or idea, you're actually promoting that uncertainty. So it's like you are positively reinforcing the creativity bias every time you kill that creative idea, and it's this negative feedback loop. So the way to handle that is be aware that the bias exists, and then you can deal with that uncertainty and deal with that ickiness in order to save the creative idea. So knowing that there's always more than one good solution to a problem, but the value of that varies depending on the context. So there's 8 kinds of creative contributions. Not all creativity is equal, and you'll see it ranges all the way from, you know, choosing a different color versus always the same color, all the way to completely disrupting the entire world. So you start out with replication, redefinition, you know, these are the kinds of things they like in school, you know, forward incrementation, advanced forward incrementation, there's redirection, reconstruction, redirection, reinitiation, integration. So these first 4, they accept the current paradigms and they tend to extend them. So these are pretty safe. These are safe methods of creativity. So if you talk about the kind of creativity that's most tolerated, it's this right here. Now the next 3, they're rejecting the current paradigms and you're trying to replace them. So you're trying to actually make forward progress. You're trying to define, you know, new paradigms. And integration is pretty much like the Bay Area startup scene. You are just completely breaking apart everything that's been done. You're regrouping things, you know, the Uber for blank, you know, the Airbnb for whatever. You know, you're trying to merge like these disparate things and create something totally new, which is awesome. So how do you teach and encourage creativity? So here, there's a lot of text on some of these, and I'm going to fly through them, but I wanted to have something that you guys can take away. So I'm going to be posting this online, and you can have all the notes and everything, so that's why I kept it on here. So this researcher, Alison Gopnik, she was looking at creative behavior in young children. And so what she did was, she gave them these toys, and it was a toy that had all these multiple functions, and you had to do a series of like 3 movements or 4 movements or whatever in order to get it to make noise. And so she had the toy in front of her, and she says, oh, I'm gonna, you know, so she used it, she showed the children, I'm gonna show you how this works. And so she did these movements, she did like 3 or 4 movements, and it made noise. And so she handed it to the child, and she said, okay, now you make it go. And so the kid repeated what she did. these many movements. However, there was actually a more intelligent solution to that, which was only 2 movements, but they were different movements. But the children would have had to experiment to find what those were. But what happened was, when she showed them what to do, they just stopped looking for the right answer. So when you think about what are we actually teaching these kids in school? So I'm lecturing to you, and even in college, I'm giving you what the answer is, and now you need to repeat it back to me. And they think, oh, they learned this because they got 100 on this test. They're not actually learning it, they're memorizing. And rote memorization is not the same as cognition. It's not the same as creativity, and it's certainly not critical thinking. So the take-home points from this study was, encouraging critical thinking and finding more than one correct solution to a given problem helps to develop creativity. And on the converse, encouraging someone to follow the outline prevents a deep understanding of the problem and decreases your ability to creatively problem solve. Even in the workplace, too. Training people to ask questions first, before they receive a solution, encourages and teaches creative thinking to produce better innovators, problem solvers, and problem finders. Problem finding is a big deal. Okay? So anyone can look at a set of math problems and solve them if you know how to do the calculations. But to put someone in front of a situation and say, okay, is there something wrong here? And if so, what is it? What is it? Well, then they have to go through all these different possibilities and permutations and try to figure out what's wrong. And that's the process of building up your cognition. Thinking creatively in that way actually does increase your intelligence. And that's one of my 5 principles of increasing your intelligence is thinking creatively. So as far as in the workplace, I know it's difficult. I actually gave a talk about creativity in front of a bunch of software developers last year, a big conference, and they were like, oh my God, we can't be creative. We have to, if I decide to do something different, the whole damn thing falls apart because everyone has their own little thing that they have to do. And that's true. But there's ways that you can go through and say, okay, maybe this is what was told to me is what I'm supposed to be doing, but I see a different solution that's actually better. And I think it would work better, and the goal would end up being faster and better, but it's not in the outline. And how do you make that decision on whether or not to try it? Do you ask permission? Do you just go ahead and do it? So this is kind of like a little how-to guide, and it's generic, and it's obviously simple. But basically, when I would teach therapists how to work independently and think autonomously, I would say you don't always have to follow the treatment plan with every single thing that I've done. What you need to know is you have to know the core components of that plan. And as long as you're meeting those fundamental goals, you have room within each step to kind of make your own choices as long as that end goal is still the same. So is it making it more efficient? Yes or no. Does it make progress towards your overall goal? If it doesn't, then probably not a good idea, because that's the whole point, is to make progress towards the overall goal, meaning the bigger picture. So do others need to learn it? Can it scale? Those kinds of things. So you can kind of take this and apply it to situations like that. So encouraging a creative work environment, one of the things you can do is give them some space, okay? So you don't have to be every 5 minutes at, as a project manager. Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Okay, I just want to see how things are coming. Okay, I'm just want an update. When it's done, you'll have it. I've been very snippy with people that were checking in too much because they felt like it was helping me. It's actually not. When you're trying to hold all these things in your working memory, someone coming by and saying, "Hey, is it done yet?" Bam. Okay, those blocks all fall. It's like Luke Skywalker drops the starship. And now he's got to start all over, levitating. That kind of thing. So, giving space, not micromanaging, kind of related. Allowing free time for employees to work on anything they want. Intrinsic motivation, which is working on something just because you like doing it. That is the single best way to get creative output. That's the single best way for efficient work. That's the best way to get the best ideas, is doing something because you really love doing it. So when you add extra incentives like money for things like creative products, you actually reduce the intrinsic motivation, and then overall you actually get less creative ideas. And there is actually data to back that up. So, open your mind. So when you get stuck in a hyper-focused linear thinking pattern, your creativity could be stalled. So when you're working on something and you're going over it again and again and again, and you're like, oh my gosh, the answer's not coming to me, and you're just like looping on repeat, the best thing to do is stand up, take a walk away, get a cup of coffee, just anything, look out the window, anything that's going to break that fixed thinking pattern. And just the act of getting up, you're disrupting your brain pattern a little bit, and you're more likely to get a creative solution. And this is actually why people were experimenting with electric stimulation of the brain in order to induce creativity. And what they were doing was they were zapping that prefrontal cortex where all your linear thinking happens, and it breaks you free of that pattern. But the same exact thing can happen just by standing up and going outside. And no brain damage. Yeah. And finally, tolerating creativity. So you want to reward creative thinking, not with financial incentives. Like I said, they actually have been shown to decrease creativity, but by promoting the conditions that permit it. Don't kill the creative ideas. Tolerate the occasional failure. Allow rules to be broken when there's social benefit. So, in closing, since I'm on right on time. So how do we get to a place where people like this are seen by everyone, not just this group, as innovators and heroes rather than criminals? The creative mindset, the tolerance for deviating from the outline, and tolerance for the rule breaking when it has a clear social benefit needs to begin in childhood. We say that we want children and people to achieve at the highest level, to be the next generation of great scientists and innovators and artists and world leaders, and yet the system we put in place makes it nearly impossible for each person to reach their potential. The worst off are those who are typically the ones whose unique skills and talents we need the most creative thinkers, the natural innovators, the ones who find comfort in the discomfort of not knowing, fearless in pursuit of their vision. What is supposed to be the most critical learning period for shaping children into leaders of tomorrow has evolved over the years into a stifling of the creative spirit, wasting the age of imagination, which we then spend the rest of our lives trying to connect with. So I want to leave you with this quote, and this is from an article that I wrote, and if you look at the citation, you can find the whole thing. In this age of innovation, even more important than being an effective problem solver is being a problem finder. It's one thing to look at a problem and be able to generate a solution. It's another thing to be able to look at an ambiguous solution and decide if there is a problem there that needs to be solved. That's a skill that really is not targeted by traditional teaching methods, and in fact, it's often discouraged. In order to teach problem finding, more creative methods must be utilized. Rule breaking, to an extent, should be tolerated and encouraged, and yes, even taught. Thank you. Anyone have a question? Yeah.
So when you're dealing with clients who are maybe less creative or willing to accept creativity, are there ways that you found effective to help usher them into being more receptive to themselves?
Yeah, what I find is that kids are so programmed into adults giving them the answers that they will just wait for you to give them the answer. So I used to ask a lot of questions when I was a kid. I was constantly asking my dad questions. Every minute, and he would always give me answers because my dad's a super knowledgeable guy. He's like the Cliff Clavin of like everything, he knows all this random facts. And so at one point, he was just too busy, and he's like, you know what? I don't know the answer to that. And I was like, what? What do you mean you don't know? And so I actually had to think about it, and it was actually fun learning to discover that answer for myself. And that kind of got me on the path of being a scientist, was enjoying that curiosity, and I do like the ambiguity and then the searching and the finding. So when you give children an opportunity to do that, instead of, when they ask you a question, instead of saying, here's the answer, ask them, well, what do you think? And even if they give you a wrong answer, you want to reward that anyway. Because even failure should be rewarded. Even trying should be rewarded. And you differentially reward closer it is to something that's possible. But you should reward the risk-taking and just give it an answer. So.